Item 5, which is the Mayoral Task Force on flooding, and I have asked that a set of recommendations, which Councillor Clearwater in his capacity as the Chair of the Environment Committee has agreed to second, a set of recommendations there. So they've been moved and seconded. And so if I could invite staff to come to the table, I understand that you've prepared a briefing for the council. So please pass on the thanks of the council to the whole team for the work that's been done, and perhaps if you could introduce the team for a matter of formality for the council meeting, and then we'll open it up to you to make the presentation.
Okay. I'll just introduce Michael Day, Firm Finance, John Mackey, Transport and Green Space Manager, Mike Galuli, Land Drainage Operations Manager, but also headed up the task force, and I'm Terry Howes, Acting GM for City Infrastructure.
Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Would you like to go through the presentation, or would you?
Yeah, I think we'll just quickly through the presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Okay. A minute while we get into that. Thank you so much. Yep. Yeah, lovely, thank you. Hopefully that's going to be bright enough, or not too bright for people to see. Okay.
I think you'll see that some of our recommendations probably make what hopefully we're going to discuss today a little bit more action oriented, but I don't think that'll reflect on the report, so thank you. Okay,
thank you. So we'll go through the a very quick presentation on the findings of the task force. We'll look at the purpose. We'll talk about a bit of context around what we've experienced in recent times in terms of the rainfall, so we get a historical perspective. The vulnerability levels is something we need to discuss. The vulnerability levels is our way of understanding the effects of what's happening in this community at a community level. When I say community, I mean the community of Christchurch. It's more than Flockton Basin. It is Heathcote, it is South Shore, it is Sumner, it is the Lower Avon. So we need to talk about that, and I think the community needs to understand that this is a task force that was looking at the most vulnerable members of our community. We live in a flat city. We're subject, as we know, to some fairly intense periodic rainfall. We're all vulnerable in a way, but this is about the most vulnerable. We've got some information on the areas that we assessed and the findings for each individual area. We'll talk about the things we can do in terms of the brief that we were given to look at the temporary measures and also at relocation options and opportunities, and some of the costs that we've managed to develop. So the purpose was to assist the most vulnerable homes to cope with the frequent flooding made worse by the earthquakes. So this is about the earthquakes, and it is about the most vulnerable. In terms of the weather, if we have a conversation about the weather, this is an oh my goodness me moment for Christchurch. We've seen 6 fairly significant rainfall events, 4 of which have been in the last 8 to 9 weeks, but 6 over the last 24 months. The last time we had a moment like that in Christchurch would have been around 1986, and you can see here on this slide, in 1986 you had a cluster of 3 in 1 year, 3 storms similar to what we had here over the last month or two. In the intervening period between 1986 and 2012, a couple of things have happened. One is we had an earthquake, or a series of earthquakes. The other thing is that there actually wasn't the same sort of intense extreme rainfall events. There were about 3, 1992, 1994 and 1999, which would have caused some flooding in the city for sure. We don't really know how that affected floor levels. But these, the recent flooding we've had has certainly been made worse by the earthquakes. You can see there, 1974 to 1980, another very, very wet period. But immediately prior to that, 1968 to 1974, virtually nothing. So that's the 1968 Wahine storm. Weather is variable. It tells us that we need to be vigilant. We covered, the Lower Avob, Dudley Creek, the Lower Heathcote, Upper Heathcote, Heathcote Valley, South Shore, Sumner, Little River and Littleton. We included the Upper Heathcote as a late addition to scope because in the March storm that was a catchment that was badly affected. The other areas that are of extreme interest are Little River and Littleton, which particularly Littleton has a peculiar set of circumstances that we need to look at further, and that's included in the report as well. This report really tries to introduce layers of vulnerability at a human scale. We looked at those members of our community that have sustained regular flooding above their floor level as the most vulnerable, more than twice since the earthquakes began. The reason why it's more than twice is because if it had just been once, we would have had skewed results as a result of the March storm. The March storm was a very significant but extreme event, and we needed to take into account those who had been flooded regularly. So it is the most vulnerable, level 1, flooded floor levels more than twice. But the second most vulnerable members of our community are those that have received regular flooding below the floor level. And we ran some very successful community engagement workshops to get some feedback on the impacts of flooding above floor and below floor and flooding that restricted access. And those people who sustain regular underfloor flooding are severely impacted and would come into the category of the most vulnerable within the task force remit. But there are also those who told us that they are vulnerable as a result of not having access to their homes, not having access to their homes by waking up in the morning and not being able to get to work, or by coming home in the afternoon and not being able to get home. So those people are also part of our most vulnerable. We've managed to capture the number of homes that were flooded. There's always going to be uncertainties around the data. So this is what we understand to be the situation at the moment. We understand that the number of households who are the most vulnerable in terms of regular above floor level flooding, that there are 56 homes in that position in Christchurch. There are 28 of those homes in Dudley Creek. So we talk about Dudley Creek and we talk about Flockton quite a lot, but it is an area that has the greatest risk, and it's also the area that we understand the most about, and it is one that we are most advanced in our understanding of. We can see that there's 28 flooded homes regularly in Dudley Creek, 260 homes within Dudley Creek and the Flockton area who have regular sustained flooding under their floorboards, under their floors, and 281 who have some sort of compromised access to their homes. So that's the size of our problem at a human scale for Dudley Creek. But also we've got problems, as you can see, in the Lower Heathcote, 13 homes and families regularly flooded above the floor, 159 households flooded underneath the home, 109 who have trouble accessing their homes during a major flood event. So the multiple floods under the home across the city, 451. That's how many people, how many families are affected by this. Within the report, there is a map associated with sort of a graphic explaining the geographic extent. But the point about this map is I don't want people to think that if you're not someone that's been flooded more than twice, we've forgotten you. That's far from the case. The most vulnerable are the ones that are flooding more than once, but we do know, have got good information about those that have flooded once, and we are looking very closely at those homes as well. So, but that information is contained in that graphic. A lot of things we can do at an individual property level. So the project brief was very clear. What can you do as a temporary or permanent measure at an individual section level? And there's a number of things we can do there, from raising houses on piles to keep them above the water. We can wrap houses with an impermeable membrane. Also in the report, that's called tanking. We can regrade so we get better positive drainage away from the homes, sandbagging, and also relocation. Those blue boxes, they're all about the things that we can do in the maintenance space. So there's, in the report, we've identified opportunities to look at the way we maintain some of these areas, maintain them better, particularly before a storm, but also after a storm. And on the green icons there, they're all the things that we can look at in local areas, and they are elaborated on more in the technical report. I'll just talk about a couple of those, one of which is dredging. Dredging, there is an opportunity to revisit the notion and the concept of dredging. We looked at that very closely over the last 8 days. It is not going to come into the toolbox as a temporary measure in terms of something we'd do in the next 3 to 6 months. I would anticipate that that is something that we're going to want to take a long, hard look at. There's about 130,000 cubic metres of silt accumulated in that river. In order to remove that, that's quite a significant amount of money. This isn't probably a council that's looking for more. Needs to look very carefully at how we manage some of these risks, and dredging is one way of managing that river, but also increased stop banks and increased pump stations. So there's a lot to look at in the dredging space. It's not a temporary get in there quickly and do it exercise. We're also looking at temporary bridges, and we know that particularly in the Lower Avon, Lower Dudley, we've got a number of bridges which act as restraints within our waterway. Over the last 8 days, we've done a lot of work, not just in Dudley, but also the Lower Heathcote, in terms of jetting out all our outfalls, making sure things are working, making sure the channel is unobstructed, and particularly in Dudley Creek, we've been looking at the issue of temporary bridges and the constrictions that they cause, as well as vegetation, tree stumps, people's plantings and what have you. We're aggressively going into those areas, looking at removing those constrictions. The point I'd make about that is we're chasing millimetres here to reduce the impacts of flooding. That may mean that we will, as a network operator, have to make some hard decisions around some of what's happening in the channel. And that temporary bridges project, which we've identified in the report, is something that we need to look at very, very carefully as a way of in place. But it's one of those things that we need a bit more time to look at, but there is an opportunity there to There's graphics explaining what some of these temporary measures look like. So that's a graphic of house raising and sandbagging at the front. Also impermeable barriers at the front there with a small blue pump on the inside of the fence, getting the water on the outside. That would also involve check valves to stop the wastewater network and up into the houses. Similarly, in the report there's explanations around how you manage setbacks. That's a graphic that explains wrapping. You see that blue membrane around a house, that's an impermeable membrane that gets painted to the same colour of the original house. This is technology that's been deployed overseas in the Northern Hemisphere, and we'll be looking at doing some pilot projects on that to make sure that the concept works in the local context, but also that it's socially acceptable to the community who would be staying there. Once more, flood defences. This is just another graphic. It explains that there's pumping opportunities, bunding opportunities, local area schemes in terms of raising stop banks. So there's an opportunity, and I think that's something we're looking at in the Lower Heathcote as a temporary measure that we could get in there and do quickly. That will require topping up stop banks, will require temporary pump stations, and that's all outlined in the report. Also, other local area pumping schemes, we're very close to understanding the benefits of beheading part of the Dudley Creek Flockton Basin catchment, so around Tay Street, and that indicates significant benefit from reducing the kind of storm we got last June to the kind of storm that you might have got in August 2012. So that's a significant amount of homes that could be protected by a temporary pumping scheme. It's expensive. We need to do more work on that to understand the wisdom of the spend and the benefit, but that's definitely an opportunity to look at and something that could be done relatively quickly. I mean, within the next 3 months to see the full benefits of a scheme like that.